Okay, great. So I think we're live now. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Murtaza Khwaja. I'm the Legal and Policy Director here at CAIR Georgia. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Caring for Detained Immigrants. I'm very pleased to have a great panel with us here today, and we're going to get to introductions with them very soon. This webinar is part of our Co-Victory 20 initiative, where we've got a host of webinars going through a variety of topics. Specifically, the webinars that I've been putting on have been focused on the lack of social services that this pandemic has really exposed in our American system, how many of our systems are broken, and how there are many things that we can do in the future to prevent a pandemic like this having the impact that it's had on us. As of today, we have 765,000 cases of COVID-19 in the United States, over 40,000 deaths. In Georgia, we have 18,000 confirmed cases and 687 deaths. We're still under a shelter in order throughout the entire state, and that is until the end of the month, which may be extended, but as of right now, we're in a shelter in place order till the end of the month. That's where we are standing right now. I want to introduce my friends here on the panel. We've got Priyanka Bhatt who is from Project South, Peter Ipster, who is with the SPLC, and Kevin Joshin with GLAHR. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves as well. So Priyanka, how are you doing today? How's everything going?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Murtaza. As mentioned, my name is Priyanka Bhatt, and I'm the staff attorney at Project South. We are a social justice organization based here in Atlanta. We aim to protect and defend all communities of color and immigrants, including Black, Brown, Muslim, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities. Our work is heavily grounded in movement building and movement lawyering. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you. I'm doing okay. Definitely worried about all of our loved ones and all our communities right now, but it's been really inspiring and amazing to see all the grassroots organizing and mutual aid happening. So that's giving me hope.
That's awesome. We're very thrilled to have you and Project South as a partner. We've worked with Project South, as many of you know, in the past quite a bit. So we're thrilled to have them here with us. Peter, how are you holding up? How's everything going? How's the SPLC handling things?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. My name is Peter Ispister. I'm one of the senior lead attorneys with SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and specifically with the Southeast Immigrant Freedom Initiative. And we're a project within the center that is exclusively dedicated to the representation of detained immigrants in Georgia and Louisiana, to include the Stewart Detention Center, the Folkestone ICE Processing Center, the Irwin County Detention Center, and the Pine Prairie Detention Center in Louisiana, and the LaSalle Detention Center in Jenner, Louisiana. And we, within CFE, focus primarily, but not exclusively, on release cases, so a number of legal strategies to get our clients out of custody, and also a little bit on removal defense. And at the moment, our program, as with many programs, has really shifted almost exclusively to focusing on representing those who are the most medically vulnerable to the pandemic within the detention centers. And as everyone here knows, that's been a pretty crushing endeavor. Other than that, I am one of two full-time working parents with three little elementary school age kids. And it's, the cup runneth over, shall we say. So we're all hanging in. And for the moment, my wife's out shopping. I'm home alone with three kids who I hope are sleeping, and a dog who I hope is not too scared of the weather. It's, a typical night on quarantine.
For sure. I think a lot of our viewers are going through similar experiences with having their kids at home, and really just having to be a 24-hour parent makes us appreciate our school teachers a lot more as well, I'm sure. And I would encourage our viewers, those of you tuning in, please say hello on the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them there. Our panelists will be able to take them throughout the program. And we also have a Q&A session scheduled for the end of the program as well. And I'm going to move on to Kevin from GLAHR. Kevin, how is everything going for you? How are you holding up? How's GLAHR been doing during this pandemic? And what work are you focused on right now?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Joaquin. That's how you pronounce my last name. And I'm a community organizer from the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, GLAHR. And pronouns are he, him, él. I've been holding up pretty well. I think this working from home has given me a lot of time to cook. So I've been looking forward to that and just being really inspired to see how flexible grassroots organizations are to help out people in need, right? The work that GLAHR has been focusing on is a lot of the information that's being spread from the state of Georgia and other important news that are coming out aren't being translated in Spanish. And so we're having weekly conversations with our members and other people around the state of Georgia who then spread out the information to Latinos that they know about just important stuff that's going on. And the other work that we're doing is, GLAHR has been working around the state of Georgia for almost 20 years, building local grassroots movement and working with local community members to fight back against racist policies and elected officials, right? And so it's with those community members that GLAHR has been in conversations with to assess the needs of community members at the local level.
That's amazing. And again, we're very glad to be a partner with GLAHR, not just on this initiative, but initiatives in the past as well. And I'm seeing a lot of hellos from the chats. We're getting hellos from Columbus, Georgia, from Atlanta, from Texas, another one from Atlanta. So we're having people tune in all over. CAIR Georgia is very happy to have all these panelists alongside with us to talk about an issue which is honestly a lot more somber. Anytime we have these people with us, it's great, but the fact that we have to continue to do this work is what's most disappointing. We're in a time where we're facing the largest global pandemic of our times, and we're continuously ignoring those that have been the most marginalized and oppressed by their governments for the longest time. And when we do that in a time of pandemic, it's dangerous anytime, but when we do it in a time of pandemic, we're leaving out those that have been most at risk. And in any time in a community, when you're leaving out those that you're only as strong as those who are at the most vulnerable position. When we are leaving those people out and they're vulnerable and they're affected, that affects our community at large. The health of our entire community is at risk. So we're very proud to be part of this alliance, and we're hoping we can do some strong work in the future. So now I do want to move on to our presentation portion. So we're going to have each of our panelists talk about the work that their organizations are doing, more specifically what we're seeing with the issues that detained immigrants are facing throughout the state. And then we're going to move on to a Q&A afterwards. Please feel free, everyone, I'm seeing the chat, everyone who's in the room, do say hello, say where you're coming from. If you have any questions, feel free to include them at any point. And then we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to move over to allowing Priyanka to do her presentation. I'm going to pull it up and we're going to share a screen so you all can see it as well.
Thank you, Murtaza. I wanted to start off by giving a national overview. So the situation right now is dire. Nationally, we have over 200 immigration prisons and jails holding about 32,000 people as of April. Over 70% of the prisons are run by private prison companies, and they are notorious for human rights violations. And in light of COVID-19, things have gotten even worse. So ICE is reporting 100 confirmed cases of COVID-19, but this is likely an underestimate. On Friday, ICE admitted that they've only tested 400 immigrants out of the 32,000 who are detained right now. And as you can see nationally, immigrants are reporting lack of medical care, lack of sanitation, not being able to communicate with their loved ones, facing retaliation for organizing, and more. If we want to move to the next slide. Here in Georgia, we have 4 immigration detention centers that are all privately run, either by CoreCivic, Geo Group, or LaSalle Corporation. And Georgia is in fact one of the top 5 states with the largest number of people in immigration detention per day. And we can move to the next slide. And the conditions in these detention centers are absolutely horrid. Project South published 2 reports now documenting the human rights abuses happening inside. And some of these violations include lack of medical and mental health care. We've had people tell us that they've had to wait up to weeks before getting to see a medical professional, or that they've completely given up on trying to see one. And in fact, when they are able to see one, often they're told to drink water, or they're given Tylenol for really serious conditions. I've also been in touch with detained immigrants who have breast cancer, who have HIV and other medical conditions, who have not been given their medication for weeks. In addition to that, there's a complete lack of mental health care. Oftentimes, if you say that you have any type of mental health concern, you're thrown into solitary confinement. We know that this is and makes it even worse on people who have mental health concerns. 2 people have died by suicide after being in solitary confinement with a history of mental health illnesses. In addition to that, there's a record of religious discrimination happening as well. People are saying that they're not receiving halal food, they're not receiving vegetarian food. We've heard that guards will actually threaten them or yell at them if they complain about not getting the proper religious food. We've also heard about individuals not getting proper religious garb and not getting proper religious materials like the Quran, like prayer beads. And unfortunately, we keep hearing about the use of force against detained immigrants, like, shooting at them with rubber bullets and pepper spraying them. There's also forced labor happening at Stewart Detention Center. Project South joins the Southern Poverty Law Center and others in a class action lawsuit against CoreCivic for the forced labor happening, where immigrants are essentially made to work out of necessity and are only paid $1 or $4 a day. And in addition, 5 individuals have died at Stewart Detention Center alone in the past few years. So
I'm sorry, I might be having some technical difficulties there. Priyanka, are you still there? Priyanka? Okay, so I think we had a few technical difficulties there, so we might have lost Priyanka for a second, but she's going to be joining us again in a moment. We'll get her back on this end. But I know that a lot of other groups have done similar work here at in these detention centers. So if Peter, do you want to talk about, she just mentioned one of the lawsuits Project South has worked on. I don't know if you've worked on it as well as a part of the SPLC with forced labor. Is that something you've worked on in the past that you're able to talk about at this?
I mean, that lawsuit, not directly. The way that the Southern Poverty Law Center is kind of organized is that, you know, there are a number of lawyers who are involved in these class action lawsuits. I believe Priyanka was referencing what's known as the Barrientos suit. It's the forced labor suit or the $1 a day suit. And then there are a number of others. There's a nationwide suit called, I believe it's called Freyhat, which is challenging ICE for its basically woefully substandard medical care, which I think is relevant to tonight's discussion, all across the country. Then there's also, I think, other kind of affirmative litigation that a number of us are involved in that's relevant here in the pandemic time, are habeas suits, right? Either on individual level habeas or group habeas, trying to just in any number of legal methods to try to get people out of custody and to assert that that the government really is in no position to be able to keep people safe in the pandemic. And then the last, I think, theme of some of the current affirmative litigation around the country, including in the Southeast, is on the subject of parole. And we've got one of those cases in Louisiana asserting that, you know, the government says, you know, this is our guidance. These are the regulations that'll govern whether or not someone can get out on parole, and then not follow their own internal guidance and really not let people out on parole.
Right. I mean, I think this is something, thank you for that clarification and for going through sort of all the different teams and lawsuits that SPLC is working on along with some of the other groups. One of the things we've seen very common in incarceration in general, which we'd love our viewers to engage on, is that we've seen this happen in very ad hoc basis. The application of various regulations, which is why we've had so many issues, is done in a very arbitrary manner routinely. And that's where a lot of these lawsuits have arisen out of. So Priyanka, unfortunately, I think from the storm lost her Wi-Fi, so we're gonna try to get her back. But for now, we're gonna move on to the next presenter, which is Kevin from GLAHR. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, but I think Kevin Caron is connecting.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Okay, great. Okay, so we got Priyanka back. Yes, we can hear you, Priyanka. Thank you for joining us. Technical difficulties in a time of Corona, it's something that we're all dealing with. So we're no problem. We're glad to have you back. Yeah, we've got you on camera now. I'm gonna share my screen again, and I'll bring your presentation back up so everyone can see.
You should still be
All right, thank you, Martha. I think we are on the next slide. There we go. So what I shared was really disturbing, and the point is that things have been really, really bad for a very long time. And things have gotten even worse in light of COVID-19. At Stewart right now, ICE is saying that there are 7 immigrants, 7 employees, and possibly an additional 30 presumed cases of COVID-19. At Irwin Detention Center, we know that there's 1 immigrant and 1 employee who has tested positive for COVID-19. We know these numbers are likely higher than what's being reported. I wanted to go ahead and read some of the messages that we're getting from inside right now. And this is from Stewart Detention Center, One man told us, "Please, we are scared. Here we cannot keep the distance of 2 meters that is called for. All of us are placed together. We are 76 people in every section. There does not exist a way to be able to avoid an outbreak. Please, we ask for help from everyone. We are human beings. We also need to be with our families to be able to help them." Another individual said, "Please have mercy for us who are locked up and cannot do absolutely anything. Here we cannot take care of ourselves because there are not even masks or anything that could protect us." And another individual said, "If one person were to get infected, we will all get infected. And there are thousands of us, hundreds of people in this place." And we can move to the next slide, where we actually have a video recording of women inside Irwin right now that will play.
Necesitamos protección, por favor. Nosotros lo único que queremos es que se ponga la mano en la conciencia y en el corazón, porque somos tantas madres que estamos en este lugar sufriendo tantas cosas, humillaciones, por el amor de Dios, porque hay no pueden entender que tenemos que estar más de un año para poder tener una corte, Dios santo, porque no entienden. Aquí estamos sufriendo humillaciones, aquí no tenemos protección. Los oficiales entran, salen, vienen sin protección. Estamos asustadas, por Dios. Estamos asustadas, necesitamos ayuda por nuestros hijos. Tenemos que salir vivas de este lugar, ya no más. Por favor, pónganse las manos en la conciencia, ya no queremos sufrir. Yo tuve que esperar 9 meses para poder tener una corte. No es justo, no es justo. Por favor, ya es demasiado. Necesitamos regresar con nuestra familia. Ya, por favor, necesitamos ayuda. Por favor, ayúdennos. Ayúdennos. Tenemos miedo. Estamos grabando este video con miedo de que tomen represalias contra nosotros, que nos aíslen, que nos corten la comunicación con la familia. Por favor, le pedimos que si no vuelven a saber de nosotros, saben que nos aislaron. Tenemos miedo. Estamos haciendo lo posible por nosotros mismas cubrirnos, haciendo mascarillas con medias, pero sabemos que esto no es suficiente. Necesitamos que alguien nos escuche, por favor. Solo estamos pidiendo ayuda, solo estamos luchando por nuestra vida. Tenemos que...
So these are obviously really heartbreaking messages coming from Stewart, Irwin, Silkston, and really anyone who is detained right now across the country. Things are urgent. People are not getting proper medical attention. They're not getting proper soap and sanitation materials consistently. They're not getting consistent proper protective wear like masks and gloves. The employees didn't have proper PPE until recently. And just a few weeks ago, we were hearing that when immigrants at Stewart tried to make makeshift masks to cover their faces for protection, the guards made them take it off. We're hearing now that many people are getting masks at Stewart, but we know that's not enough protection at all. It's obvious that these facilities are not abiding by the Center for Disease Control guidelines that are calling for individuals to be 6 feet apart. As you heard, there's no way for people to be 6 feet apart when you are in such a confined area and when there's so many people in that area with you. In addition, the CDC is calling for restricting all transfers of individuals in and out of detention centers, and we know that that's not happening. We keep hearing that ICE is continuing to move immigrants in and out of Stewart and Irwin. We just heard from an immigrant at Irwin that there were 40 more immigrants at the facility who arrived from Florida. And when immigrants actually stand up for their rights, they're retaliated against. A few weeks ago at Stewart, immigrants were tear gassed and put into solitary confinement after they took control of their pod and demanded to be free. At Irwin, after making the video that we just saw and going on hunger strike, the immigrants were retaliated against by being put on lockdown and could not access their phones or the video tablets anymore. So right now, more than ever, their lives are in danger, and we need to call for the immediate release of everyone who is detained. ICE has not been responding to community organization calls and letters for release. And so most recently, Project South wrote a congressional letter signed on by 50 other organizations urging the Georgia congressional delegates to urge ICE to release all detained immigrants. This letter included really compelling testimony from doctors at Emory University who warn that detention centers are not equipped to handle a COVID outbreak. They are not equipped to protect the people inside. And they warn that the hospitals in South Georgia are not ready to respond to an outbreak like this, especially if an outbreak occurs in a prison or detention centers. There just are not enough ICU beds and ventilators in these hospitals in South Georgia. So since our letter, Representative Johnson has signed on to a congressional letter to ICE urging them to release all the medically vulnerable individuals in ICE custody. In addition, Representative Lewis is supporting a bill called the First Act, which is calling again for the release of people who are at high risk of contracting COVID-19. This is an important step, but again, we're calling for the release of everyone from detention. Everyone at this point is at a risk. I quickly want to mention the amazing work that the coalition that we're part of and GLAHR is part of called the Georgia Detention Watch. The work that we're doing, we're taking calls from detained immigrants daily and documenting the COVID conditions. We're following their lead and supporting them on organizing on the inside and uplifting what they're going through on media and social media. We're doing a lot of local advocacy to county level officials. We're investigating the retaliation that's happening and the deportation flights that are continuing to happen. And we're coordinating with advocates across the country who are going through the same thing. We're really trying to use every tool in our toolbox right now, and we'll continue fighting. Thank you for this time, and I definitely look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Priyanka. We're getting more hellos, and I do want to encourage all our viewers, please do say hello. Let us know where you're coming from. We're having viewers from Lawrenceville, Tucker, another one from Lawrenceville, Doraville, Lilburn, and throughout the United States. One of the questions we actually got, Priyanka, we've got a question about the First Act. And if anyone here on the panel has any more information on that, please do provide it. Well, what does this act, you said it calls for the release of everyone. Is there anything else that this is calling for? Who are the sponsors on this act? Do we know what level it is? And what, at any point is it going to be able to pass?
So I believe it's calling for the release of people who are most medically vulnerable for contracting COVID-19. And I know that Representative Jayapal and Senator Booker are the ones who have introduced it. That's the information I know right now, and look forward to learning more. I know it was literally just introduced.
Great, thank you for that, Priyanka. We're going to move on to our next presenter from GLAHR. GLAHR has been doing some pretty amazing work, not just during the time of COVID, but throughout. We've worked with them before, and we're happy to have them on this program. Kevin, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kevin from the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the 287G program. You know, it's insane that we have the stumped reaction of ICE to release detainees. And on the other hand, we have policies like the 287G agreement between the sheriff and ICE that continues to place people in unsafe and cruel processes for deportation. Basically, the 287G policy threatens our community family separation, as it allows local and state law enforcement officers to enforce immigration law, placing members of our community in removal proceedings. And though ICE has stated it would curb the amount of operations and seek alternatives to detention, ICE's recent request for 45,000 valuable N95 masks let us know that we must be prepared for further operations, right? From 2017 to 2019, 6,740 people were arrested in Gwinnett County, a county that has a 287G policy, and processed for deportation. And in Cobb, another county that has the 287G program, there were nearly 2,000 arrests in those 3 years. According to Track, Gwinnett County takes the first place in the entire nation for the most ICE arrests under the 287G program. Cobb County trails not too far behind at 5th place. In 2017, Gwinnett County accounted for 20% of all deportations that resulted from the 287G program. In Cobb County alone, there have been over 48,000 US-born children living without a parent in the state because one of their parents was placed in deportation process as a result of the 287G program. These children face trauma from having their parents forcibly removed from them, and it will take many years, perhaps a lifetime, to solve some of these traumas that these children have endured today. There are some concerns, some allegations, and false information that spreads quicker than the facts, and that is how people stereotype immigrants and the Latinx community, that they are rapists, child molesters, drug addicts. But we do actually have access to information that disproves those badmouth accusations. And for example, in 2018, nearly all of the detained people in Cobb and Gwinnett had either no conviction on their record or had been arrested for a traffic violation. Out of the 1,898 people arrested in both counties, 878 had no prior convictions, 432 were arrested for a traffic violation, and 88 for a DUI. And they were all processed for deportation. So here we see that the broad majority of people processed for removal under the 287G program could have been any of our family members. What's more substantial, though these sheriffs claim that their departments do not racially profile individuals, the amount of people deported without any prior convictions speak otherwise. The statistics are important, but what is just as important, if not more, are the testimonies of affected community members. Since 2009, GLAHR's hotline has assisted and heard the outcry of community members who reported violations of their personal rights and racial profiling from law enforcement. Though the policy has affected people from across the globe, the 287G policy has been detrimental to the Latinx community. Such race-based immigration enforcement leads us to fight back in an appropriate manner. If the Latinx community is ICE's biggest target and one of the most affected by the 287G policy, GLAHR is motivating the Latinx community to be the biggest opponent to the 287G policy through the vote. For our community, citizens, and the undocumented, it is important to view the vote not as a solution for our problems, but as a strategy, a defense against deportations. That is where our voting campaign, Soy Georgia, comes in. In Gwinnett County, there are 48,500 registered Latinx voters from the entire Latinx population of 184,000 people. And in Cobb County, the number is 26,800 registered Latinos. Though these numbers represent only a fraction, it is our core belief that undocumented people cannot be separated from political conversations and actions that affect their lives. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, GLAHR had already knocked on over 5,000 people's doors to motivate them to vote for a candidate that would remove the 287G policy. Since then, we have been calling voters daily to motivate their vote. When we speak for their support, it is the faces of their family members which they think of when they are reminded of how detention centers and anti-immigrant policies affect people. Living on the margins of society, the undocumented community uses what it can to fight back with grassroots organizing. We are not trying to we're not trying to motivate only Latinx voters, but all of the community to vote. But we must be mindful that our community has been creating roots in Georgia for over 20 years and that no detention center or policy can remove. It is the way that we are rooted to support one another that has paved the way for our collective voice to vote out hate and to create a better future. Right now, 287G makes up over 40% of the arrests that are processing people for deportation, but we have a chance. ICE needs us to fail because without the 287G policy, they know that they cannot fight a politically conscious community that knows their rights. The lack of ICE's response in the face of a pandemic urges us to fight back however we can. Free them all, in detention, in deportations, pasa la voz, no la tos.
Thank you for that presentation, Kevin, and for going over a really important part of what's holding back our immigration system. CAIR Georgia stands with, I believe, everyone in this panel against 287G. CAIR Georgia also calls for the abolition of ICE. ICE was created in 2002 as a part of the Homeland Security Act in response to 9/11. It's criminalized immigration in a manner that had never been done before. We've seen immigrants criminalized from that and treated like criminals for not just things like DUIs or misdemeanors, but for really just being here, which is for having status here, for having presence here, which is not how immigration was handled in the past. We've marginalized a community that has been very beneficial, not just for the country, but for, on a personal level and individual level as well. So CAIR's strongly condemns any 287G programs, especially throughout the country. We're working to end it anywhere in Georgia. Kevin, do you know about any other 287G policies throughout the country and where it might be used more than Gwinnett or in similar numbers to Gwinnett? I know Gwinnett's one of the highest, or is it the highest?
Gwinnett has the highest amount of people deported under the 287G policy, but of course that doesn't mean in deportations in general.
Right. So it's something where we know we've been working very hard on to end that program there, the 287G program there. And that's something that you can engage with at the local level, especially if you're living in Gwinnett, in your sheriff races and your Board of Commissioner races. This is something that you actually have a voice in. And so we encourage everyone in the community to do that. We're going to move on to the SPLC and their presentation in a moment. We got another hello from Marietta in Georgia. I do want to encourage all our viewers, if you have any questions about 287G, about ICE, or about any of the issues we've talked about, we've got a few questions already. I've written them down, but if you have questions for any of our panelists, please do send them over in the chat. Peter, I'm going to throw it over to you now. Are you there? Great.
Thank you. Yes, I am. And I just want to apologize to the viewers for how much I've been in and out of my screen. I'll save you the details, but it's a fair amount to manage here. And, I just would compliment my two co-panelists who have left me with the need to move elsewhere in my notes because they've been so comprehensive in what they've spoken about. But there are a couple of things I wanted to sort of underline and one or two other things I wanted to highlight that have been troubling from our work. The first was this idea that our clients are so scared to see ICE staff in and out of the detention centers without wearing protective gear themselves. And that's been an early report that we've gotten. I think I first heard it from Pine Prairie, but I think it's fairly, Pine Prairie, Louisiana, but I think it's fairly universal. And I just can't imagine how scary that must be. But that's not an isolated incident, and it's not a rumor. And the other is the idea that I think the women in the video from Irwin spoke to of retaliation for speaking up. You know, and that's something that we've seen historically, but, you know, I think that is a continual fear in this pandemic. And, you know, of course, I think all of us have just tremendous critique of ICE and our nation's immigration policy writ large. But, you know, occasionally there comes something where I think to myself, you know, that is just so painfully not the way you would hope the country would work. And this idea that people would express their, you know, First Amendment rights and have retaliation. I don't know, tonight it just got to me to hear it again. So I wanted to underline that piece. The other that I wanted to speak to is, you know, I've been listening in over the last week, just on these Zoom calls as my colleagues do some of this litigation, particularly, well, both in Louisiana and in Georgia, the habeas litigation to try to get people out on this argument that, you know, the government can't keep them safe in the pandemic. And I just want people to know, you know, that ICE, and this is not to defend, I mean, I'm not defending ICE, but I just, you know, for full context here, right? ICE comes to these court hearings and insists that they can. I mean, that's their argument, right? Is that, oh, yes, we can, and yes, we are. And, you know, I listened to this warden the other day, and it was just, you know, point by point, you know, the judge and the, you know, our counsel would ask, you know, well, can they really be 6 feet apart, you know, when they're sleeping in bunks? Or can they be 6 feet apart when they're on the pill line? Can they be? I mean, a person doesn't believe a word of it. I don't really believe a word of it, but that's the position of our government in court, that, oh yeah, we got this handled, and, you know, there are, you know, systems in place for this. And, you know, if someone is found to not be 6 feet apart, well, they'll be, you know, punished by, you know, whatever the silliness was, you know, going to segregate, whatever it was. I mean, I think prior presentations, and we all understand that, you know, that we are tremendously skeptical at best of that position, but that's the position, right? And so it leads to then, in part, and we've been working a lot, as I was saying earlier, on parole. You know, there is a method, for those who don't know, right? Within the law, it is provided for that the government has very wide discretion to let people out, right? These are not criminal detainees. This is a civil system, you know, and it's right there in the code that you can ask for humanitarian parole. And that's largely what we're doing in this context. And just not getting it. I mean, not getting it anywhere to the tune that we should be. We actually, I think, have gotten about 3 in the last week in Louisiana. And I was talking to our staff in Stewart, and, you know, I said, have you gotten any people out on what I called COVID parole? And she said, well, not specifically. I mean, there've been a couple people released. It's not clear that they're in response to our requests. You know, it's just this situation where, as we see all over the place in the pandemic, and we see it here in ICE detention, that there's, you know, government regulation or policy, and it's honored in the breach, right? And it's honored in sporadic, unpredictable, totally substandard ways. And that's what we're seeing with parole requests, what we're seeing with bond hearings. And the couple other things I just wanted to highlight before maybe we have some time for question and answer, sort of 2 other pieces that I didn't hear people speak to as explicitly. One is just a hat tip to the medical community. I mean, there's very public hat tip to the medical community in terms of what doctors and nurses are doing to treat sick people in jail. But it's been quite moving to collaborate on these cases with doctors, folks who are affiliated with Physicians for Human Rights or other organizations, or just, you know, find their way into the work however they might. I was on a call with a gentleman the other day from New York, and he said, you know, all I've done the last 2 weeks is write affidavits, you know, to make more compelling our position that if you have one of these medical conditions, or if you're on hunger strike, like a couple of our clients are in Louisiana, that you're going to be immunosuppressed, you're going to be vulnerable, and you're going to get out. And, you know, that doctor voice is so important and so powerful, and in a way different, right? Everyone's voice is different. Everyone's voice on this call is different. Everyone's voice is different. The doctors are just saying, you know, this is crazy. Like this is no way to keep people alive. Like it's just nuts. So that's been, I don't know, just something I've been noting in this experience. The other one I want to speak to really briefly before I stop is courts, right? So these folks are detained and they're virtually all in a court process. Well, how has the court been responding? Well, similarly badly in a way, which is to say that the courts are not uniform in their response. There's no nationwide policy. And, you know, what we have called for with courts is that bond hearings should be prioritized. Everyone should be able to appear telephonically or by video. You know, that non-detained court really shouldn't be happening. And, you know, and that there should have been a system to accommodate, you know, to keep the client safe so that they didn't have to come into closed spaces if they're in detention to appear for court. And like everything else, it's just totally substandard and hasn't been happening. And it's, you know, and the criminal, I mean, this is what's so awful. I mean, the criminal courts have done a better job of responding, right? I mean, they've had standing orders and a regularized process to some extent. You know, that's a little bit of what we've been up to. It is, you know, I imagine that everyone on the call, I talked to my colleagues and we just acknowledge that it's we're carrying just a completely emergency caseload right now. And it's just quite a time, you know, and people get calls from clients and family that very much echo, again, the video from Irwin of people being scared for their lives and people being scared for the lives of their loved ones. And the government simply not responding to clients, not responding to families, not responding to attorneys, not responding to their own guidance. So, you know, I can have a thought of humanity for some individual ICE officers that I speak to on the phone, you know, on an individual basis that might be trying to do a better job than others. But beyond that, it's a very dehumanizing and terrible situation. So I'm really just glad to be invited and glad to learn something more about Priyanka and Kevin's work here.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Peter, and for shedding light on really some of the more nuance in this conversation and adding that nuance to the conversation. I think that's very important for our viewers and also for the rest of the panelists as well. We're getting quite a few questions over here, and Peter, you touched upon a few of them, but I'm going to really open this up. This is our Q&A session, so please continue to ask questions in the chat. We have a few already. So the first one that I see is, are there issues occurring in every detention center, or are there more egregious violations occurring in any particular center? I know we saw the video from Irwin. We also saw, we heard about things happening in Stewart. So, you know, if anyone wants to take that.
I'm happy to jump in. We're seeing it literally across the country right now, whether it's Georgia, Texas, New Jersey. We're hearing the same thing over and over about these horrid abuses happening and people being scared for their lives. In Georgia in particular, I can say that we've definitely heard from Stewart, Irwin, and Folkestone. We are getting a call from Folkestone Detention Center, which is on the border of Georgia and Florida, of people not getting protective wear, of people being scared, of people being really close together, not getting sanitation materials and all that. So I would say that they're really uniform across the state and the country right now.
I think I would agree with that. And I think, another little detail that I've heard from a number of detention centers is that the detainees themselves aren't getting information, right? So when you're scared, one of the ways you reduce fear is by telling truth and information, right? So on the one hand, it's this sort of physical stuff that's not happening, right? No medical treatment, not proper PPE and all of that. But also no information, no word. Why is that person moved now over there to this cell block? Why is that cell block locked down? What in the world is COVID, and what does the government know about it, and what does the government plan to do about it? Will you ever test me? Whatever you would imagine that a person would want to know. Again, I was listening in on one of these court hearings, and the answer, someone asked him if the government told you anything about COVID, and his answer was like, well, they put up one flyer somewhere, but no real engagement.
Yeah, and I think that's something CAIR Georgia has seen throughout, is we've seen a dearth in leadership, especially in the state of Georgia, but also nationally, where our elected officials have not been taking this as seriously as they should have. It's endangered lives. We're glad that we're in a shelter in place now, and it was instituted at the beginning of the month, but it really needed to be instituted a lot earlier. We could have saved a lot of lives and really flattened the curve, as they say it, a lot earlier. Peter, you touched upon the second question that we got. So I'm going to bring it to you first, and then anyone else, please feel free to jump in as well. So are detained immigrants in detention centers more at risk than someone incarcerated in jails or prisons? And I know, Peter, you mentioned that they were doing better there. So what are they doing there that's better, and why are detained immigrants more at risk?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Actually, can I go back to the very, very beginning? My pronouns are he, him, and his, and el.
Okay.
And I need to be in better practice of that, but that's super important to me. So
could you repeat that for our viewers as well, please? I just want to make sure everyone got that.
Oh, that my pronouns in terms of gender identity are he, him, his, and el. And our friend Kevin began that way, and as soon as he said it, I thought to myself, darn it, I should have too. When I meant to half an hour ago.
I think we all should have done. We're happy to do that.
In any case, I don't know. I don't want to overspeak. I just, my sense is that criminal court systems may have been a little more organized in their calendars and the way they handled court. And I think, and others here might correct me if you all know, but I think there may have been at this point a higher number of releases of inmates by the Bureau of Prisons than there have been from ICE. Now the Bureau of Prisons population probably higher than, so maybe as a percentage, I don't know how it washes out, but I don't think there's necessarily, I would be surprised to think that there's anything particularly about being in criminal custody that makes you any substantively safer than in immigration custody, right? Because we always talk about how similar they are.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a fair point. Priyanka or Kevin, did you want to touch upon that question as well?
Yeah, I want to mention that I think everyone detained or incarcerated right now is at risk, immigrant or not. And I think from Project South's point of view, we're an abolitionist organization, and so we're supporting releasing everyone right now because people are dying. It is a really urgent situation. I know we're supporting efforts led by Women on the Rise and Racial Justice Action Center on getting people out of the Atlanta City Detention Center right now because everyone is at risk. And I know there's a lot of great work happening trying to get people out from the Fulton County Jail as well. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. So we have a couple more questions that have come in. And I'm gonna switch them around a little bit. So they're about 2 questions that we can sort of put together. So the first one is, how can we support people in detention who are going to be fasting during the month of Ramadan? Priyanka, I know you talked about some accommodations not being given. So what's a way for the communities to support people in detention while they fast during this holy month? And then the other question, I think is a broader question, is what can the community do to help with these issues that are going on? This is for everyone. So Kevin, Priyanka, Peter, whoever wants to jump in, please feel free to.
I can start. I think to support immigrants, I know there needs to be an accountability process, and that's the issue, that right now our government has no accountability. We're writing letters, parole's not happening. So when we hear complaints about, folks not getting proper religious food or religious accommodation, we really want to make sure that we're holding ICE accountable for these violations that are happening. So when we hear them, we'll let the community know, and we've done that before. And we're also encouraging to call ICE, call these institutions that are really putting our communities at risk. There's no reason for any detained immigrant during Ramadan to be detained. They don't need to be detained. I think our call really needs to be to continue putting pressure on these institutions to release all of our communities right now.
I would echo that call. I mean, I think, it's a political issue. People need to put political pressure. And in case I wasn't clear, I believe Sifi's position is also that really the only solution here is that everyone get let out. I think there are some people can potentially find organizations or ways to communicate or write letters to folks who are detained from a moral support point of view. And then, there are a number of organizations that maintain bond funds. And that's another concrete way to be involved. But I think probably, the most urgent need at this point is that political pressure at the state and the federal level.
I would echo those calls as well. And CAIR Georgia will be releasing sort of an FAQ from some of these questions we have on what steps our community can take in regards to this. Also, he, him, his pronouns, myself, and Murtaza Khwaja. We should have started off with this, so I do apologize, but for our viewers who are still tuning in, I'd like to make that clear as well. So thank you, Peter and Kevin, for bringing that up earlier. We had a couple more questions. And I know we have to end soon, so let's do 2 more. I have them written down from before. Have we seen any detained immigrants released on parole due to COVID-19, and how many have we seen? In Georgia, I'm assuming.
I think as I was saying earlier, it's not always clear why people are being released. We've also seen a funny thing, I think, in a few cases at least, where the government is releasing people essentially on their own recognizance rather than on parole, which I don't totally understand unless they are trying to maintain some principled stance that, on your own recognizance, right, is like out of the grace of the government, right? It's, so maybe they're trying to maintain that, like, well, we're not going to do what you ask us to do, but, if we deign to release a couple of you, then, we look magnanimous. I wouldn't say it's been more than a couple of dozen max release, and nowhere near a couple of dozen in response to any particular parole request. And, you know, my colleagues here may know more about that. I mean, there was at some point a rumor that there was going to be a much larger release from Stewart, which has never materialized, and a much larger release across the ICE system nationally, which they have not met. Our office in Louisiana, I think, has an, you know, our attorneys have gotten, I think, 3 people out on parole. And there may have been, you know, a couple more than that from other ways.
Priyanka and Kevin, if you want to jump in on any of that, the question was, and thank you for that insight, Peter. It was asking for, have we seen any detained immigrants released on parole due to COVID-19 in Georgia? So if we have any numbers, or if we have any idea, if we've had clients, if we've had conversations with people we know who have been released due to COVID-19 concerns.
I haven't heard of anything, but something I just did right now for those who are viewing is in the comments, I copied and pasted the numbers that you can call if you're trying to call Irwin County Detention Center or Stewart County Detention Center and demand that they release everyone inside. So yeah.
Thanks for that, Kevin. So the last question that we're going to go over, I think, is we've gone over through various positions. I think one of the most commonly held positions that I've seen is if the government, if these detention centers can't guarantee the safety of the inmates, then they should be released. There's another position which says they should just be released in general, and there's a bit of nuance there. So I wanted to engage and see where your organization stand. I know, Priyanka, you've already mentioned you are the project staff is an abolitionist group, but if there's any type of nuance there that either of you want to talk to our community about. And I think Peter may have just dropped out as well, but if he's able to rejoin us, then we'll bring him up to the loop as well.
So definitely GLAHR believes that there shouldn't be any detention for undocumented folks, but fighting for intersectional rights is always a priority for GLAHR as well. And it understands that there have been other marginalized communities who are affected by prisons and detention across the US. And it's also adamant about detentions for all people of color and poor people.
Great. And Peter's rejoined us. Peter, so the question was, there's been a little bit of different positions on what the release should look like. So there's been calls to, if detention centers can't guarantee the safety of their inmates, then they should be released. Whereas there have been other abolitionist groups who've just called for the general release of all their detainees. So we're asking what your organization's position is and why, and if there's any type of nuance you can bring to that conversation. So Kevin just spoke, I think Priyanka, and then you two, we'd love to hear from your 2 organizations as well.
I want to echo everything Kevin said. I think we definitely are on the same boat. We are calling for the release of everyone. We have documented these same violations before COVID-19 ever existed, right? So these are systemic issues within the system, and we're calling for the end of all detention.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I had to go from computer to phone for the end of this. But I think our organization is in a similar place in terms of just the understanding that no one can be safe, and you know, and that there's no place for detention. You know, if I'm wrong about that, maybe someone will ask me to let you know, but I'm fairly certain that's where we're at. And you know, our current litigation and caseload is focused on the medically vulnerable because we feel like, that's the absolute emergency. But the fact is that medically vulnerable or not, everyone is vulnerable in detention and everyone should get out. And again, it's a policy choice that, it's a non-criminal system, and it just shouldn't be.
Thank you so much for that. And for all our panelists, I want to say thank you for joining us for this webinar and for this conversation. We're going to end the webinar now. I want to thank our panelists again. We have some great people with us, great groups that are doing work on the ground and that we've worked with in the past. If any of you have any final words for our viewers or for our community, please feel free. The floor is yours. But I do want to personally thank you for CAIR Georgia for joining us, for giving us such a thoughtful discussion, and for leading really the fight against sort of the issues we've seen detained immigrants face.
I just want to thank you again for inviting SPLC and having me on personally. I've definitely worked alongside GLAHR and Project South before, though not Priyanka and Kevin too much. But I don't think I've ever personally worked alongside CAIR Georgia, and it's a real pleasure. And thank you for putting these on.
It's a pleasure to have all of you on here. Thank you again so much. And then thank you for our viewers for tuning in for this whole program. We'll be back next week, and we'll be happy to see all of you again soon. So, Assalamu alaikum from CAIR Georgia and from all our panelists. We'll be in touch soon. Take care and stay safe and healthy.